He stood in silence, the weight of the 5-year contract hanging over him like a shroud. To the world, he was nothing more than an invisible servant. He watched the steam rise from the pot, his movements practiced and devoid of pride. The wife swept into the room, her designer blouse bright against the drab interior. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed instead on the glowing screen of her phone. To her, he was merely furniture, a fixture in her life that existed to be ordered around. The air crackled with a sudden, sharp tension. The wife tossed her handbag toward the couch, a gesture of careless entitlement. The silence between them was not peaceful, it was a wall designed to keep him in his place. The CEO arrived, his presence tainting the air of their home. He carried the remnants of a failed business deal, a reckless gamble that he now intended to bury. The protagonist stood in the corner, eyes averted, playing his role perfectly. The wife demanded an apology, her voice dripping with artificial outrage. She pointed at the protagonist, demanding he take the fall for the CEO's gross negligence. He remained still, knowing that a single word of defiance would invite scrutiny he couldn't afford. The CEO smirked, relieved to have found his target. He leaned in close, his predatory gaze heavy with malice. He knew the protagonist had no recourse, trapped by his own engineered poverty. The protagonist offered the apology, his voice low and monotone. Every syllable was calculated to be just pathetic enough to satisfy them. He felt the cold sting of their laughter, a small price for his long-term goal. The mother-in-law swept in, her fur coat heavy with the scent of vanity. She immediately began searching for the protagonist, her eyes scanning for weakness. She lived for the small, stinging humiliation she could inflict upon him. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, immediately demanding his monthly savings. Her tone was sharp, a demand dressed as a household duty. She saw him not as a son-in-law, but as a bank that occasionally needed to be squeezed. The protagonist retreated to the counter, opening a rusted tin box where he kept his meager cash. Each bill he handed over felt like a heavy stone on his conscience. Yet, he surrendered the money without a flicker of hesitation or regret. The mother-in-law snatched the money, her eyes never meeting his. She turned toward the wife, a predatory smile forming on her lips as she pocketed the loot. The protagonist remained in the shadows, his face an unreadable mask of subservience. Inside the bedroom, the CEO began to sweat, his bravado crumbling as he checked the markets. The failed deal was spiraling, and the legal repercussions were looming closer by the second. He needed a distraction, and the wife was all too happy to oblige. The wife started demanding more from the protagonist, her greed fueled by the mother-in-law's earlier success. She wanted expensive jewelry, something to match the status she felt she deserved. The cycle of extraction was accelerating. The protagonist looked out at the city, the skyscrapers reflecting in his calm, grey eyes. He was the only one in the room who knew how fragile their reality truly was. He remained silent, allowing them to believe they had won every encounter. A sharp knock sounded at the door, freezing the trio in their tracks. It was the rival, a shadow from the business world they had all hoped to forget. The atmosphere in the apartment shifted from smug arrogance to cold, sharp terror. The rival stepped inside without invitation, his presence eclipsing everyone else in the room. He didn't look at the wife or the mother-in-law, his eyes immediately locking onto the protagonist. There was a flicker of recognition, a dangerous secret shared in the silence. The CEO tried to intervene, but the rival's icy glare silenced him instantly. The wife cowered behind the mother-in-law, the sudden shift in power rendering them both mute. The protagonist remained in his corner, his silence now feeling like an iron cage. The rival finally spoke, his voice calm and lethal. He addressed the protagonist, his words a direct challenge to the contract's protective veil. The room felt like it was shrinking around the fragile lie the protagonist had maintained for years. The protagonist stood up, the chair scraping sharply against the floor. For the first time, he met the rival's gaze directly, his grey eyes losing their dullness. The air felt charged, a storm ready to break within the confined space of their home. He pulled a single, heavy document from his inner pocket and placed it on the coffee table. It was the contract, its ink dark and final against the glass surface. The wife gasped, the realization dawning on her that she had never known the man she had called a servant. The office is quiet, save for the hum of the ventilation system. A shadow moves quickly, sliding a thick envelope into the bottom drawer. The trap has been set with meticulous, cold precision. He walks into the office, his footsteps heavy and rhythmic. He notices the slight misalignment of the drawer handle. He says nothing, his face a mask of practiced, silent obedience. He doesn't open the drawer. Instead, he turns away, knowing exactly whose fingerprints are on the trap. The game has begun, and he is ready to play the fool. The wife adjusts her jewelry, her face set in a performance of deep, wounded betrayal. She meets her allies to coordinate the public narrative. Her voice is soft, calculated, and sharp. The CEO paces the floor, sweat beading on his forehead as he reviews the forged documents. He is desperate to consolidate power before the audit. He needs a scapegoat, and he has chosen the perfect target. The rival watches from the shadows, his eyes cold and calculating. He sees the CEO's panic and the wife's schemes converging on one man. He remains still, waiting for the blood to be drawn. The protagonist walks past them, his head bowed, carrying a stack of files. He catches a glimpse of their conspiring expressions. He doesn't falter, keeping his rhythm perfectly steady. The CEO summons the protagonist, his voice thick with fake sympathy. He asks for a progress report on the very accounts he plans to claim are stolen. The protagonist agrees, his compliance absolute. The wife cornered him near the water cooler, her face twisted in feigned pity. She tells him to confess before things get worse, hoping to extract a preemptive admission. He remains silent, offering only a polite nod. The mother-in-law confronts him, her voice dripping with venom. She warns him that his marriage is over and his career is finished. He doesn't even blink, his expression as empty as a blank page. Rumors spread like wildfire through the office walls. People whisper, glancing his way with eyes full of mockery. He ignores it all, focusing only on the rhythm of his own breathing. The CEO makes the final call to the board of directors. He is sweating, his confidence slipping as he finalizes the betrayal. He prints the fake files, convinced of his imminent victory. He sits quietly, watching the clock tick down to the meeting time. He checks his watch, a flicker of something ancient and dangerous in his expression. The trap is now fully primed. The wife meets the CEO at the door, sharing a brief, triumphant look. They enter together, a united front ready to destroy a man they believe is defenseless. The stage is set for the final humiliation. He follows them in, his demeanor perfectly subservient. He takes his seat at the far end of the long table. The air is thick with anticipation and the scent of expensive cologne. The CEO stands, slamming a file onto the table. He begins his speech, his voice booming with fake indignation. He accuses the protagonist of grand larceny, his finger pointed directly at his chest. The wife adds her testimony, her voice cracking with performative sobs. The board members murmur, their faces turning towards the protagonist with disgust. He sits perfectly still, refusing to defend himself. The CEO demands the protagonist hand over his badge and security clearance. The protagonist stands, moving with a sudden, eerie grace. He reaches into his jacket, not for the documents, but for his phone. He hits send on his phone. Instantly, every screen in the room turns black, then flashes with a single, glowing red notification. The CEO's face goes pale as the truth hits the screens. The protagonist rises, his posture changing. He is taller, sharper, more dangerous. He looks at his wife, then at the CEO, his voice cold and clear. The 5-year contract is finally void.